Donald Trump blasts Judge Engoron's law clerk. We know that the gag order is still in a stayed position, so Trump has a little bit of his free speech back now. That's very nice of them. But he used it pretty effectively. Over the holiday break, he posted on the Truth platform saying a bunch about Allison Greenfield, Psycho Engoron, Peekaboo James, and others. And what happened right after that, or around the same time, is Jack Smith notified the Court of Appeals. The gag order is pending in the New York Court of Appeals, and he says, see, this is why we need the gag, is because Trump is posting mean things on the Truth platform. So we'll read through that. Trump's attorneys responded to Jack Smith's little tattletale, and then we have MSNBC that kind of, hit the hyperventilation button over there with what might be one of the key witnesses in the January 6th case, maybe as an expert witness or somebody, we'll see. But he was called to the January 6th Select Committee hearings, Judge Luttig. We'll hear from him and two other people who say, okay, people are not getting it. Trump is a monster. Why aren't voters recognizing what a danger he is? And so we're going to go through all of it. But first, this is Trump's post on the True Social, and it was a burner. And I think this is what we should be hearing from him, because he is criticizing people who lack credibility, who are partisan and biased, and who are attacking not only him, but his organization and everybody else who works for them in New York. So he posted this, November 23rd, 12:03 a.m. Trump says, "Happy Thanksgiving to all, including the racist and incompetent Attorney General of New York State, Letitia Peekaboo James, who has let murder and violent crime flourish and businesses flee. The radical left Trump-hating judge, a psycho, Arthur Engoron, who criminally defrauded the state of New York and me by purposely valuing my assets at a tiny fraction of what they are really worth in order to convict me of fraud before even a trial or seeing any proof, and used his politically biased and corrupt campaign finance violator, for those donos, Chief Clerk Allison Greenfield, to sit by his side on the bench and tell him what to do, and crooked Joe Biden, who has weaponized his Department of Injustice against his political opponent and allowed our country to go to hell, and all of the other radical left lunatics, communists, fascists, Marxists, Democrats, and rhinos who are seriously looking to destroy our country. Have no fear, however, we will win the presidential election of 2024 and make America great again." November 23rd, 12:03 a.m., Trump drops the truth. Now, what we see right after that is Jack Smith has a little bit of a fit. I can't believe he's talking about Allison Greenfield. And all, we need the gag. And so this is what he says from the special counsel's office. This is Jack Smith's office from the U.S. Department of Justice. This is to the different Court of Appeals. This is to the District of Columbia, the D.C. Circuit. So we've got a lot of gag appeals going on right now. Engoron's gag appeal is in the New York Court of Appeals. This one, which is a state court, this is in the Federal Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. And this is a letter from the U.S. Attorney, Assistant Special Counsel Cecil Van Devender. He says, Court of Appeals, the government submits this letter pursuant to the rules to notify the Court of Appeals of a document that was filed on November 22nd in connection with an appeal in Engoron's courtroom, which was referenced in the party's briefing and arises out of an incident that the district court discussed at the October hearing. And specifically, the government refers to the Court of Appeals in the federal case, to Exhibit E in the attached affidavit, which is a sworn affirmation by an employee of the New York court system assigned to the Threats Assessment Unit discussing Trump's social media post, which resulted in, quote, hundreds of threatening and harassing voicemail messages that have been transcribed in over 275 single-space pages. Now, because the parties referenced in the matter in their briefs and the court inquired oral argument about evidence of ongoing threats and harassment, we respectfully submit Exhibit E and the related documents for completeness as a supplemental authority. Signed by government bureaucrat for Jack Smith's office, Cecil Van Devender. And this is the affirmation from Charles Holland. And we've talked about this in previous segments, but they keep using this, right? And this was also the one in Trump's Court of Appeal, in the New York appeal. He also said, this is very curious because all these voicemails, as we'll see here, this one came to Judge Engoron's voicemail. I'm not going to call you too many names, Judge. Today, it's clear you're a little something. You like to do things, and I'm sure. And your shirtless pictures is very inappropriate. You're so inappropriate, but you're clearly a dork. Everything about you screams like a dork. So again, I hope they, and things, there's probably some criminal elements to this. It gets pretty complicated in terms of the law, but you can read it. But the point is, when was this said? We have all of these quotes, okay? You're terrible. Date and time? Don't know. Date and time? Don't know. Date and time? Don't know. These are all for Allison, so-called. And so they're bad messages, but if they are actual harassment, guess what? That's a crime. You can charge that. Go charge them for a crime under New York law. You have their voicemails? Great. Great. You have the phone numbers? Great. Can your New York Police Department backtrace that? Yes, they can. Great. Go find them and arrest them. Threatening phone calls. Same thing there, okay? If it's an actual threat, that's a crime. You can go prosecute those people. So they're free to do that. But we don't even know, first of all, that they came from Trump because we don't have a date and time. And it sounds like a lot of this stuff, right, if you just read through them, it's hard to even see that they're like responding to Trump. Trump told me to call you and take you out or something. No, they sound like just unwell people, okay? And in a big country, a law of big numbers, this is something that happens, unfortunately. And this is something that happens in all cases. Do you think that the clerks did not get phone calls about Johnny Depp or whatever her name was, whatever that case was? It happens all the time in many cases. And these people should be used to dealing with some very, very difficult people like cartel members or something, right? Organized crime. These are some nasty phone calls and voicemails. But of course, Jack Smith is notifying the Court of Appeals. See what's going to happen to all of us if you don't gag Trump? Well, Trump and his team responded. This is what it looks like. They said, all right, listen, Court of Appeals. Here, this is from James Otis Law Group. He sends this over. He says, all right, this is a response to their little tattletale letter. He says, the prosecution letter, they cite a submission, which is a completely separate case to the New York Appellate Division. And they say that we now have, quote, new information. What? But that new information that's new, it goes back to October 3rd, 2 weeks before the gag order in this case, in Chutkan's case, was even entered. The letter is an impermissible attempt to supplement the record on appeal with irrelevant information that could have been, but was not submitted into the district court below. So they don't get to add it in now. Now to date, Trump's defense says the prosecution has never submitted any evidence of alleged threats or harassment to any prosecutor, court staffer, or potential witness in this case. Stop the domino effect. This falls short of the standard under federal court for the solidity of evidence required to justify a prior restraint. So it's nice that you have those little voicemail memos, but no thanks. Moreover, the cited affirmation, albeit irrelevant, concedes that Mr. Trump, they said it in there, did not directly threaten Ms. Greenfield. Instead, it describes the speech by unidentified, independent third parties. And I'm sure if they looked it up, they could go find those people. Have the FBI look into it. Okay, they'll drop everything and go find them. Now, this confirms that the prosecution seeks to impose a speech burden based on audience reactions. Which is simply government hostility, and you can't have that. Now, the prosecution also ignores that the trial judge and the principal law clerk are both judicial officers, and the principal law clerk violated New York law by engaging in partisan activity that's forbidden while the case was pending. And of course, the operation of the courts and the judicial conduct of judges are matters of utmost public concern. So we're allowed to talk about it. It says the special counsel instead has brought an inflammatory, lawless indictment, has made false and misleading statements about President Trump, and has leaked confidential information in order to harm President Trump. Both the indictment and the gag order represent an unconstitutional attempt to silence him, and they are clearly election interference. The constitutional guarantee has its fullest and most urgent application precisely to the conduct of campaigns for political office, respectfully submitted to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, challenging the Chutkan gag order on the Chutkan gag order, responding to Jack Smith's little tattletale letter. And you can see signed here by John Sauer on behalf of Donald Trump. And so we'll see where this ultimately goes. We're expecting a ruling, hopefully any day now, on this to see if portions of the gag order are stayed or what the Court of Appeals does. But a lot of people were concerned about this. Oh my gosh, Donald Trump attacked the judge's law clerk over the weekend. In fact, this is what ABC said when they were having a roundtable about this. Can you believe what Trump is doing? Here is what they sounded like.
Speaking of mental state, I assume you guys all saw the Thanksgiving message that Donald Trump, so he put out a post on Truth Social at 2:03 a.m. on Thanksgiving. There was this long screed against all the people that he hates, but he went specifically at the judge in the New York civil case and the clerk who has faced a barrage of threats on her personal phone. Whoa. Threats, anti-Semitic threats. I mean, what do you make of that?
Donald Trump is seeking perhaps to taunt these judges to, not only have a gag order, but to seek some enforcement against himself. If his campaign is built on revenge and retribution, he wants to be ever more the victim. But the problem right now is that
You guys prosecuted him 4 times. What are you talking about? He's making himself the victim. You think he wanted to go down this route? You started it.
Voters seem to have stopped processing just how out of control control Donald Trump is. It's not just that he's prone to misstatements and gaffes that he taunts Joe Biden for, but to call him unhinged suggests that he was hinged. But, you know, this is really a remarkable moment where he's rising in the polls, to Sarah's point. And yet,
they're shaking.
Here we are.
And this is as there are court proceedings on a gag order.
I was just going to say the federal one is pending in the D.C. circuit. We just heard arguments in that recently. There's huge problems with that gag order. The last time we saw a similar gag order against a political candidate back in the 80s against Harold Ford Sr., that was significantly struck down. The Supreme Court's never ruled on a gag order before. They've never even said it's constitutional. And so in the meantime, you have Donald Trump clearly wanting to test the limits of that. The First Amendment, a political candidate, the core of our free speech rights, versus a criminal proceeding in D.C. Of course, the New York one's a civil proceeding. I think you're exactly right. If, you want to win over the judge, at the point that you haven't won over the judge, you want to annoy the judge enough to make reversible error so that you can go up on appeal. And in the political case, all the better. Have them enforce that gag order if you're the Trump campaign. It will only make him bigger news.
Ooh, I think you might be right about that. So every time they try to box him in, people recognize that they are not legitimate. And it feels like they are attacking their political opponents because they are. We can all see it. And they want to tell us, like, it's the DOJ and they're a legitimate institution and you should not attack them. And that is exactly the opposite of the First Amendment. And so this is one of the more unintelligent judges that is here. This is Judge Luttig. He was somebody who testified in front of the January 6th Select Committee with Liz Cheney. We'll see how much we can tolerate. He might be a witness in the January 6th case with Judge Chutkan.
In recent weeks, the former president has virulently escalated his contemptuous rhetorical attacks on the institutions of law and democracy in our country.
You're allowed to do that.
The purpose and the intent of these attacks is to delegitimize these institutions in the eyes of the American people.
Well, if they are illegitimate, if they are lacking credibility, then we deserve to talk about that and we deserve to have challenge to them, right? If the power structure is corrupted, the only thing you can do is speak out about that so that you can rally people to your cause so that you can get enough votes to change the power structure. That's the whole point. And so Trump would never sit around and just say the DOJ is legitimate. And just flip this around, by the way. If Donald Trump was prosecuting Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton in some courtroom in Texas and the judge's clerk was, hanging out with Ken Paxton or something like that, right? Or whatever, they would freak out about that. And it would also be illegitimate. This is why you don't prosecute your political opponents, right? This is why you don't go down that route so that you don't have to have these battles unless it's really clear, unless it's unequivocal. But it's not in this case. In fact, it is pretty equivocal. They've indicted him 4 times and the American people don't buy it.
In anticipation of his campaign for the presidency as the Republican nominee, but also to serve his own purposes as he faces criminal trials in multiple jurisdictions. The former president, unfortunately, has largely succeeded in doing exactly that over the past few years.
That's right. But it's not, Trump is very persuasive, no doubt about that. But he doesn't need to do much. Okay, they're doing it on their own. And we've watched it. They indicted him for documents. What? And Joe Biden's not getting indicted? There's cocaine at the White House and Donald Trump is getting indicted for January 6th? What? They're going after his businesses. Miss Bergdorf, they created a statute in New York to allow adult survivors to bring in new claims. And now that's backfiring. Now you're getting a bunch of other celebrities in New York getting hit. So it's a nonstop, lawfare. And people don't like that. We can see clearly on his face, there's no credibility there. And so they're doing it to themselves, which is the point we've been making for years. They're doing it to themselves. Like, these people don't even know what they're contending with. They are focused on raw political power, but they are exercising that power in such a reckless manner that they are actually evaporating their own power. The reason the Justice Department works, the reason the Supreme Court works, is because people believe that they're legitimate. People believe that they're credible. And when that goes away, everything breaks down. You can indict somebody 4 times, nobody blinks an eye.
He's delegitimized, in the eyes of the American people, the institutions of law and democracy.
You guys to yourselves.
Millions of Americans today no longer believe in their democracy, their elections, and their institutions of democracy and law. Today, we see the former president is viciously attacking the federal courts and even the individual judges who will preside over his cases in an effort to delegitimize the federal courts and the state courts and the judges who hold office in the judiciaries. The prohibitively high cost to the nation at this point, though, is that over the past 3 years, if not longer, the former president has normalized his behavior and his delegitimizing and dehumanizing rhetoric into our political culture, where it will stay forever.
Yeah, they've created this. this. I mean, they're the ones who broke glass in case of emergency. They decided 234 years of historical precedent not worth really adhering to. And so they decided, let's go ahead and prosecute our political opponents. And then they're screaming at Trump. How dare he defend himself against judges who have a history of being partisan, who put, their highlight reel in their newsletters, and who will also file documents. There it is. Also pull up statements in sentencings like Judge Chutkan saying that Trump should be prosecuted before the case was even filed. So many of these people are biased. Molly Gaston, other prosecutors have gone, were already involved in Trump investigations well before they made their way to the special counsel's office, and they are just organizing themselves to take out their opponent.
We're now a few hours out. How do you think these judges are going to rule tomorrow?
I think the judges will decide to uphold the gag order. If Trump had shown that he had the ability to constrain his behavior, perhaps they would have considered whether the measure was necessary. But since he continues to double down and, as you say, Alicia, inflict this sort of damage not just on individuals involved in the system, but in the system itself, I think it's very likely that we'll see the gag order sustained.
Okay, so
she says it will be a Trump-specific gag order. So Trump himself is such a monster that free speech is important, but not that important. Okay, Trump has really broken the level of what we can allow in this process.
I always like to remind our viewers, though our viewers are smart and do not need the reminder, that we're talking about multiple gag orders here. So that's the New York civil fraud trial. We also have Trump's federal gag order. You actually had the chance to listen in on those arguments. Your big takeaways?
Well, look, I think here, too, the gag order is necessary. In fact, Jack Smith filed on Thanksgiving Day a notice with the court alerting them to what was going on in New York, and to this 275 pages of complaints, of emails, of phone calls that the clerk in New York had received. And they documented how the threats rose when Trump posted. I think this is compelling in Washington. And here is the problem. No court wants to be the court that permits an attack to occur, whether it's on a witness or juror or court personnel, because they didn't take steps in advance that could have kept Trump from continuing to post. Of course, no one wants to do anything that comes close to restraining the First Amendment rights of a political candidate. But when you balance the merits at stake here, it seems clear that Trump has to be controlled, and these gag orders are the only way to do it.
She just got it. Trump has to be controlled. They're going to use the power of the courts to try to do it. They're going to see if they can contain him, because they can't have him talking about the election. They can't have him talking about Jack Smith and the deranged thugs that are being orchestrated by Joe Biden and Merrick Garland. He's got to be gagged. Otherwise, he can speak too much truth and people might hear it and they might realize what's reality and what's not. So, of course, my friends, we're covering all the Trump trials here. I'd love it if you subscribed wherever it is you're watching this, joining us to come here. We go live at 5 p.m. Eastern time, all the weekdays. We'd love it if you joined us. Thanks for also inviting a friend or family member to come check out our channel so that they can see the inner workings behind all of these cases, what's actually being filed, and we'll look forward to seeing you and them back here on the next one.